Hey guys, Phil here, Zone Master and other things, and we're going to do a little bit of a nerd tech thing here today. We're talking about Rails, and what I specifically want to look at is the sharding that came out in Rails 6.1. Rails 6.1 is now released officially as a stable build. I think that happened beginning of December, and so in there is some cool sharding stuff that was kind of percolating up over time, but now it's there, and I really want to do something to show how you can use sharding, how easy it is, because this is something that we're going to be rolling out in some of my projects, because we've got lots of rows and lots of customers, and we're using tenanting, and tenanting works well, but it would be even better to be sharded, because that would speed up some database read and write time. So let's take a look at it. I just installed Rails 6.1 under, so I'm reusing Ruby 2.72, and I've got Rails 6.1.0. So what I'm going to do is quickly fire up a new Rails app. I'm going to be using MySQL, and I'm even using some people say MySQL. I always said MySQL. I have version 5.7 on here just because, but the same thing, it works under PostgreSQL, however you want to say that, or SQLite or anything else. Any supported database this should work on. So let's do a Rails new, call it sharding, and we need to set the database to be MySQL, and it will take a few minutes to fire this up. So we'll see how long that takes. Not so bad. I'll probably trim some of this out. So what is, while we're waiting, let's talk about what sharding is, in case you don't know. Sharding is where you have multiple databases behind, with similar schemas or the same schemas behind an application, and you write normally related data to the one database, and so on and so forth. Some people do it on split on models. So for instance, you have customers, and maybe you would have their invoices on one thing and your sales or products on another, or something like that. You can do it like that, but for me, the most logical way to do it, now my logic might be questionable, but the most logical way to do it is to have related content. So this shard over here is going to contain all of the records for tenant number one. So tenant number one is going to be on this shard, and that will be everything. That will be a list of all of their customers, a list of all the orders that they place. I'm talking about, let's say, for example, on our Amazon product. But for our other product, which is a book product, you can have an author over here, and it'll be all of their readers, all of the downloads, everything like that will be listed in this database. Now, the way that this is done, it's not dynamic. It's not dynamically creating shards. You can think of a shard as a database. So it's not dynamically creating new databases. We're kind of pre-setting up, database 1, database 2, database 3. So it's not the most fluid, dynamic possible solution. Some people, you have a shard per tenant, for example, to ensure complete data security and integrity. That's not what we're talking about doing here. I haven't looked at it deep enough to know if you can do that, but something tells me not really. That's normally done dynamically, is normally done with schemas and not databases. But I guess there's nothing stopping you from doing it, but that's just not what we're going to do here. In this example, what I'm going to do is create a couple of different shards and write data to each one. And and that kind of thing. Holy, it's almost done. And then once this is, actually I can do this now. Let's move into sharding. And while we're waiting, oh, it is done already. So let's just open this up with VS Code. And move it over there like that. Let's see if that looks good. Yeah, not bad. And I can maybe even move that down because I'm not going to use this so much now. That, like that, and that, like that. There we go. Okay, so we're in our thing, and first thing we want to do, I guess, is create the databases, or configure the databases. And so what you can do normally, I guess you're used to seeing this kind of thing. You have environment. Maybe set up some defaults here, but you have an environment and you've got the database. You don't have to do it like that. You can actually have a level underneath that, which is kind of cool. So, for instance, let's do it like this. We can say primary, which will do that. And we're not going to call it that. We're just going to call it sharding primary DB. And another thing that's kind of cool is replicating. So let's just do a primary replica. And it's also called that. And we just need to say replica true. I'm going to probably do another video about what these replicas do. But then let's create a shard1, and we'll just call that sharding shard1 DB, also called sharding shard1 DB, and we'll just call that primary shard1 replica. So there we go. We've got two databases, primary and shard1, and their replicas. Done. So now I'm going to close that just to get a little more real screen real estate. That was probably stupid, but let's just Rails DB create, and we'll see that it creates, there we go, primary DB and shard1 DB. As per our database thing. So let's now create some data and put it in there in the seeds, just because I can. Gem install SolarGraph. Failed to install a SolarGraph gel. Yeah, whatever. Not so fancy right now. Close this. They've already got it in here, so I'm just going to cheat and use the movies. And I'll add another one in just so you know that I'm doing it myself. It's wonderful life. It's Christmas time, so let's put a Christmas movie in there. And all right, so we've got those. So, but of course we need a model. So let's Rails G a model called movie. And name. As an aside, maybe this makes me look stupid, but when you're doing these generators on the for the models and so on, for an attribute, if you don't say what kind of attribute it is, it defaults to string. So it saves you a lot of typing. Instead of typing that like you used to have to do in the old days, you can just do that, and it will create a just a string variable. You know what I mean. All right, so we've created the model. Let's migrate the database, and you'll see that it does it twice, and that's because it's putting creating one of those tables on the primary and one of those on the shard. So now we can seed the data, and you say, but Phil, where does the data go? So let's take a look. Let's show our databases. And we can see we've got the primary and the shard 1. So if we use primary DB and select star from movies, there's our movies. The interesting thing is if we use the shard, is we check this and do the same thing, there's nothing. So we've, by default, we've written all that data to the database, primary database. And my assumption is that it uses the first database defined there. Because there's nothing, unless it's using the name primary. I don't know. I haven't looked into this. This is something new for me. Like I said, we're exploring together here. So maybe it's using the first defined database. If somebody knows different, let me know in the comments nicely, please. Thank you. So, okay, there we go. We've created some stuff and put it into the database. So let's now start doing something a little bit more sophisticated. And let's go to the application record. And here's where we can kind of set up what's going to happen and when. So connects to shards. So when we explicitly connect to a shard, and in this case, let's use the default. And when we are writing to the database we've defined. It's called primary. This one, where are you? So this one that we've defined as primary, that's what's going to be written to. And then reading, this is so powerful in and of itself, to be honest. We can say the primary replica, if I define that right. Yeah, primary replica there is our the one that we'll be reading from. And then we can say shard 1, let's call a thing for shard 1, and we can say that we are writing that to primary shard 1. And then we are reading, why not, just because we can, from primary shard 1 replica. Now remember that these are not the names of the databases. So the database name can actually in the database can be anything. These are the kind of key names that we've set here. Because if you notice that these are the same, because they're replicas, so the names are the same. So it's talking about this name here is the one you set up in application record. So now when we go into console, we are, of course, reading from that primary database because we haven't done anything different. But let me just set up a little file here. So what we can do, though, is, of course, explicitly say what shard we want to read from. So we can say active record base connected to in a role of reading, and we want to read from, let's say, shard 1. And we set up a block there, and now if we say movie first, and if we run this in the console, it's got nothing. I got nothing for you because in shard 1 there are no movies. So let's change that. Let's take this same block, but instead of changing it from reading, let's put it to writing, and let's create a movie with the name of Ronin. I love that movie, Robert De Niro. And so what we will see here, okay, now we've created a movie there called Ronan. Notice the ID is 1. So if I go over here and I use the primary database, I've got 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and It's a Wonderful Life. But if I switch to the sharded database, I've got 1 is Ronan. This, of course, is slightly dangerous. And one of the drawbacks of sharding is that we've got 2 movies with an ID of 1 because those databases are completely independent. So once you switch to that database, you have to have the integrity. So I'm sure there are some issues there about foreign keys and so on, but you'll figure it out. And just for the sake of it, let's duplicate all of this and change this to be the default. And let's see what the movie, when we get default, is. It's Star Wars. And I can 7 Samurai. Nope. We can add that, and because I didn't change that, I screwed it up. Let's change it to Yojimbo, doing all the great Kurosawa films. And it's ID number 4. So if we look, okay, I added a second movie to the shard and a 4th movie to the primary. So this is a very simple explanation or demonstration of how you can do the sharding. But the cool thing is, of course, you can change. You don't have to set it up like this. You can do a shard. You can define the shard, which shard, to be, if you're using a tenanting system like we are, tenant, current tenant ID, if it's less than 1,000, then you could use the default, or otherwise you could use shard 1. So all tenants under the ID of 1,000 would go over to default. Tenants with an ID over 1,000, their data would be written out to shard number 1. And you can, rather than having that kind of logic, for me, I don't like to have that logic and code like that because it's never going to change and it's dangerous if it changes. I would write it into the database, so probably I would add an attribute onto the tenant that is shard number, and then I would define a method inside the tenant. This is in class tenant, you know. God, I hate key things on here. So which shard, and then it would simply be, is my ID less than 1,000? If so, send me to default, and if not, send me to shard 1, or something like that. So you can, and then you would just say tenant, current tenant dot go away dot which shard. And you could wrap that now, like in a tenanting system, like I use in most of my systems, the tenant is set on the call in. So like, you know, the tenant is set by a cookie or something like that. And so you'd set the tenant, you set the current tenant ID, and then you would set the current shard, and then all of your functionality after that moment would be directed at that current shard. So it's a pretty simple, it's so simple, this, you know, and I think it's a great way to start looking at sharding. Is it going to hold up in a big system? I don't know. That's something we're starting to investigate on the 2 main projects that I work on, which is OnMaster and Bookmatch Club. We're going to put this sharding in place because it just makes things a lot easier. So we're going to start testing that because it breaks down the data, makes the databases smaller, therefore makes the reads and writes faster, therefore makes the backups easier. There's so many benefits to sharding from a practical point of view, and I'm not about theoretical writing of software. I'm just writing a product here, guys. And so if this helps me make a better product from a management point of view, as well as a customer point of view, then I'm all for it. So anyway, that's a quick rundown. My first time looking at sharding as well. So if I made any mistakes, please let me know. Please write in the comments if you've done any sharding using this or use some other method. Before we used to have gems like Octopus and things like that would do it, but now it seems like we can do it built into Rails. If you're thinking about using it or anything, leave me a comment because I'd love to know what your experience is. And we'll see you soon. Bye for now.